A Louisiana toddler is dead after being left inside a hot car for hours. Now her father is facing second-degree murder charges. Investigators say he had been drinking and left the child behind as outside temperatures soared. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You're watching Law & Crime. Ansleigh Boatman was just 2 months shy of her second birthday. Her family says she brought boundless joy, laughter, and light into every room she entered. But on June 8th, that light was gone. Deputies with the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office say the toddler was left alone inside of a hot car for more than 9 hours. That fatal day, the temperature climbed to 92 degrees with a heat index topping 104 degrees, according to the National Weather Service. Investigators say Joseph Boatman, Ansleigh's father, picked her up around 2:30 a.m. and strapped her into her car seat. But instead of taking her inside, detectives say Boatman walked into his home and never returned. Hours passed, and it wasn't until noon, nearly 10 hours later, that a family member made the heartbreaking discovery and saw Ansleigh's lifeless body still in the car. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities say Boatman had consumed multiple alcoholic beverages before picking up his daughter. He's now charged with second-degree murder. This tragedy marking yet another case in the growing number of hot car deaths in the United States. According to the advocacy group Kids and Car Safety, there were 29 hot car deaths in 2023. In 2024, that number rose to 41. And so far in 2025, there have already been 6. And while the circumstances vary, the legal consequences often don't go far. Kids and Car Safety reports that in at least half of these cases, no conviction is ever made. About 31% do result in convictions, but outcomes vary, and the remaining 19% are either pending or have unknown outcomes. As for baby Ansleigh, her family is calling for justice. In a statement, Sheriff Randy Smith said this is a devastating loss that no family ever wants to face. This case involved compromised judgment, and the result was heartbreaking. And here to break down the story with me is Sunny Slaughter, a law enforcement instructor and jury consultant. Sunny, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Kennedy.
So let's just jump right in. You weren't necessarily involved in this case, but based on your experience, when a child is found unresponsive in a car, what does law enforcement prioritize in those first few minutes?
First, they want to prioritize what happened and how did this child get there, who placed the child there, why was the child left there, and the conditions. So first responders are going to be really critical in this as they, try to see if the child is still responsive when they arrive along with law enforcement, and then begin the investigation to determine how long the child has been there, who put the child there, why was the child left there, and how did this unfold at all? Because this is horrific.
Yeah, and let's just get into this. Just such a tragedy. What steps are usually taken at the scene to determine whether this was neglect, an accident, or something worse?
So they're going to start with interviewing the last person that had the child, saw the child, and anyone else that might be in the home or near the location where the child was found. They're going to start interviewing family members, who the parents were, first of all. Who was the parent? The mother, the father, anybody who had custody of the child. They want to know what the relationship is and who had the child last and what happened. Where was the child picked up? Where was the child? Like, what happened between the time that the person arrived home, who was driving the vehicle? They're going to want to know who was last driving the vehicle, and they can do that in their investigation. If the person says, well, say if I was driving as opposed to a man was driving, I'm 5 feet tall and he's 6 foot tall. So they're going to look at the height and weight. All of these things will happen in the investigation. The position of the car seat, the position of the mirror, does it fit the person who says that they were the last person driving the car and that was with the child? They're going to ask the questions: where did you pick the child up? What was going on with you? And in this case, there's alleged alcohol. So they're going to want to if somebody says that someone was drinking, then they're going to want to probably get a test right away to see if the person's blood alcohol is still elevated, where they were. They're going to start investigating locations. If they were drinking, as in this alleged case was, they're going to want to go back to the scene and find out what the person was drinking, how many drinks that they had. Do they have cameras? Are there cameras in the area where the person was drinking, and to determine if they appeared intoxicated while there, in addition to getting those medical tests.
Well, I know you just mentioned a potential toxicology report, but if the child was left, as police say, left in that car for 9 or nearly 10 hours, would alcohol still be in the person's system for that long?
It depends on if they were still drinking after they went to the location. So the
Okay.
amount of alcohol that was consumed, and we're assuming that when the person got to the location, that they were allegedly the father in this case, that he did not begin drinking again. So if the person did still drink, then there could the potential for alcohol or other substance still be in the system. Yes, there is a potential to determine that. And but not necessarily, we've been seeing other cases where they can go back and say this is the person's body weight based on how much alcohol they consumed. This is what approximately is showing up in the toxicology report as well.
Do you think that if alcohol wasn't in his system, because that's what police are saying, they're claiming that, do you think that if he wasn't impaired, allegedly, that this would have been a completely different story? Because there are instances where people leave their kids in the car and forget even when they aren't drinking.
Absolutely, and that's what I was going to say. It depends on what was going on with this particular father. Allegedly, he had been drinking, but was there something else that allowed him to just totally forget that his daughter was in the back seat of the car? And not just forget, but to forget an overnight for the amount of hours that nothing happened, that no one else came in the home, that he did not at any point in time realize or remember that his child was not with him? Where was the mother? Where was anybody else in the family? How is it that a child was left in the car this long? And I did not see where the car was either outside, but I'm thinking it was outside because they said another family member saw the child in the car. So does that mean that the car was outside and not in a garage? So what, did nobody else walk by the car at any point in time and see or even hear the child? There's no way that a child would even sleep through this amount of heat without the cry, or the swelling sounds of an infant crying. Did no one hear anything? And I think this is a small town, based on my information, that it's a very small town, about 800 or so people. So the potential is great that maybe no one saw or heard anything from the child, depending on the proximity of the homes in relation to this.
Yeah, I mean, a terrible story all the way around. And we know that the child was reportedly picked up at 2:30 in the morning. And I mean, that alone raises questions. What does that
Yeah.
time of day signal to investigators?
That the person that picked up the child, and particularly if there was alcohol allegedly to have had, that the child probably should have stayed where she was at the time. Because if a person's getting off of work at 2:30 in the morning and they're picking up a child, they could still be tired, okay, from working, and no alcohol involved. Sometimes we have to readjust our thinking when it comes to safety, and whether we are tired, whether we are distracted, and whether we should just not maybe leave the baby where the baby is, if possible, as opposed to picking up the child and then completely forgetting. But if we're talking 2:30 in the morning, there's a lot that could have been going on. And if alcohol was involved, then I'm going to say that a person who is alcohol impaired or controlled substance impaired should really not be transporting their child at 2:30 in the morning or at any other time.
Right. And like how you said, 2:30 in the morning, if he was, drinking, even 2:30 in the morning and he was getting off of work. I mean, that's just a time of night where I'm sure many of the family members are wishing that that baby would have stayed where she was before she was picked up. But when alcohol is involved, how does that affect the way law enforcement approaches the case? Like, as soon as they learn, okay, we he may have been drinking, what do they do?
So one of the things that they're going to do is try to determine how much alcohol that the individual was drinking, because and one drink might not impair someone based on their weight, based on whether they drink regularly or not. But if the person is not a regular person that consumes alcohol, one drink could cause impairment. So one of the things that they're going to do is, like I said earlier, is go back to that location and find out how much alcohol was potentially consumed. And it's also better to get it on camera. But even if they have to interview the bartender, if the person was there for a long period of time consuming alcohol, then they're going to go back, and that really triggers an investigation that is more along lines of the arrest that we've seen for second degree murder. Apparently, they have had enough evidence, and through their investigation with talking to individuals, retracing the crime scene, possibly looking at video, and the video could come inside or outside of the bar as a person is driving. One of the things that I've done in the past in working on a case, and even as a defense person, is to go back and actually redrive the route that the person has driven to the location, because then you can determine how many cameras are catching the view of that individual driving by, and if they made a stop anywhere. Banks have a lot of cameras, if they were trying to get money. So their behaviors these days are caught in a lot of different ways. So that is what law enforcement would do before they go in and then request a warrant for arrest, because they need to have not only probable cause because there's a death, they need to have the probable cause that links up to the reason why this death could have occurred. And that is how they will retrace their steps to go in to get the warrant for the arrest, and to make it possible and plausible why they have made this particular charge with the prosecution team. They have to give them enough evidence for the reasons that this person would face second degree murder charges.
Now, we can only imagine that after hearing what happened, after the father came outside, it would be understandable to assume that he was probably remorseful. How do officers just separate that emotion from criminal responsibility?
Well, they have to stay focused on the job at hand. And even though the father may have been remorseful, this is a crime. There is an individual, a child that is deceased. And many times these officers have children of their own, they have relatives. But what they have to do is stay focused on what the job is. And the job is to protect and serve. And while the person may be remorseful, they don't have to be rough. They may be crying. They may say, look, you'll get through this, but we need to do our jobs, and they will effectuate the arrest as they have been charged to do. And then all of the other things, all of the remorse and sympathy, that really has to be left to the family members as they determine how they're going to support this individual. I'm sure the father probably didn't do it intentionally, but even though it might not have been intentional, this is still a homicide. This is still a clear and present danger to the child that resulted in a death. And the child cannot come back. So, remorse alone and remorse set aside, there's a job to be done, and that's what has to happen. Because this individual also put other people in danger, driving if potentially intoxicated, and just the behaviors. There's going to be a lot for this family to unpack, and I feel sorry for them. But law enforcement and the prosecutor's office and others, there are resources and services available to try to help them get through it. And it's also okay if they still support him going through this, because it may have been a mistake, but it was a deadly one.
Right. And the sheriff said that, this could have easily been avoided. So that's, I think, what makes
Mhm.
this case just more heartbreaking, just realizing that this didn't have to happen, that he didn't have to pick the child up. And unfortunately, he did. And now that child is deceased. Now, Again, just bringing it back to just these cases involving children. We know any case like this that results in a death is sad, but when you look at a child that was just a few months shy of her second birthday, it's so much worse. How do officers manage their own emotions while staying focused on the evidence?
You know, it's I'm glad you asked this question because a lot of times people don't think that officers can get emotional and that these have residual effects on them. They go home and they hug their children tighter. They hug their, family members tighter. They also probably talk to them, and they also talk to one another. And wellness, officer safety and wellness is really critical on these cases. So I'm hoping that this department, and it seems like it might have been a small department, does have someone that the officers can talk to. And more agencies across the United States are focused on officer safety and wellness, their mental well-being and their mental health, because they're seeing a lot of things that linger in the spirit and soul, and they still have a job to do, and they have to get up. They can go from one murder scene to another, and that is a lot to deal with. So being able to talk to someone, being able to unpack and unwind, being able to go home and have solid homes that are free from distractions and disturbances, and offer comfort and support from their own family members is really critical at this time. And for other officers who might see that one of their colleagues is not doing well, for them to see something and say something, that applies to law enforcement as well. If they feel like they're unraveling from the last case, maybe they need to take a few days off, relax, and try to get themselves together, talk to someone. But it's really important that the public remembers that every officer is someone's person, someone's parent, someone's loved one, someone's child, and they are only human.
Absolutely. Very good information there. And this was a hot car death. Unfortunately, we are hearing more and more about hot car deaths, especially this time of the year with it being summer. Are officers being trained differently now compared to a decade ago?
Yes, they are being trained more now. They have different equipment. They have sticks that can hit the doors and other things that break windows rather quickly. They're being trained to more on CPR and resuscitation around hot car deaths and infants, and even investigative practices on what to look for, how the child was in the car, to ask more questions. What was happening? How could this have happened? What were you doing? Things around distractions, even things around drowning death, where children seem to go from cars to outside events. There's a lot of things that they're having to take in. We have climate control issues. So wherever they are, they're learning how to manage and navigate the nuances of what they're seeing in their communities. And hot car deaths are everywhere. So being trained, watching the videos, watching takes like this, also help them to realize what things that they may have missed in one incident, or something to prepare for that they never had to do before.
And in general, when a car is parked in a driveway for hours, what are the signs that police look for to understand how long someone's been outside?
So, one, they're going to touch the hood of the car. They're going to ask, when was the last time, if there are any cameras in the area. And a lot of homes have cameras outside externally. So they're going to look for when the person arrived home. They're going to look to see what the cell phone was. When was the last time somebody used their cell phone? When was the last time the mileage was on the car? What were they doing? If there's caught on camera, how they were behaving when they got home. Did they go back and forth to the car, or did they just get out of the car and go home? Because usually if you have to go back and forth to a car, you're going to see your child, like if you're getting groceries or something now. So missing the child that way could be, if they're seeing somebody go back and forth and they just leave the child there and never return, that might be questionable about the behaviors and things that the person said that they did before they left the child in the car. So they'll be looking at a lot of different things. Don't know what's in the area, but uh, the temperature of the car, the style of the car, the make of the car. There are cars nowadays that actually come with sound that says, check the back seat of the car. There's some pressure points in the car. So law enforcement are also being trained on that to, okay, is this a newer car, an older car? Was there notification to check the back seat or things like that in the car? So those are critical things that could be happening as well.
Absolutely. And that's a good point that you bring there. I know in my car, even if I have a jacket in the back seat, it'll notify me when I turn the car off and it'll light up red saying, check your back seat. So a good point there.
Yeah.
But for parents watching who may think, I could never forget my child or this would never happen to me, what would you say based on the cases you've seen?
When you have children, and even when you have pets, if you have them with you, and sometimes even if you're not picking them, just do an automatic check the back seat. Just do an automatic, don't leave the child in the car or the pet in the car. Do let it be just as routine as getting in the car that you're checking the car before you get out of the car to ensure that nothing or no one has been left in the car, a pet or a child. And particularly in these hot temperatures on these days when you just think, I'm a mom of four. I have never left my children in the car. I have never forgotten them because the children are always the first to get out of the car, even before groceries when they were very little. So that was something that I did. I think it's critical that we remove the most precious items first, and that will be our children, the most precious people in our lives. Remove the children out of the car first, and everything else behind that can happen later.
Absolutely. Some great advice there. Well, Sunny, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Joseph Boatman's bail has been set at $750,000. Ansleigh's family is collecting funds for a meal train to try and help relieve some of the burdens off of the family while they prepare to bury the little girl. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.